President to meet face-to-face with a North Korean leader. This is we are getting some of the first images of Kim Jong-un making the rounds in Singapore. Now remember, they are 12 hours ahead of us East Coast time, so it's technically in the middle of the night there, but we understand they are out and about, Un and his entourage, while the president is sounding optimistic ahead of the historic sit-down, but is warning Kim he's got one shot to dump his nukes. Watch.
He can take that nation with those great people and truly make it great. So it's a one-time shot, and I think it's going to work out very well. How long will it take to figure out whether or not they're serious? I said maybe in the first minute. I think that very quickly I'll know whether or not something good is going to happen.
Former UN Ambassador Bill Richardson offers this caveat.
I don't think they'll fully denuclearize. I know these guys. We got to watch them. We got to put a lot of inspectors, a lot of, they got to declare their inventory, where they have these weapons, because they hide them. But, you know, I'm hopeful. I've been working this issue for a long time, and this is the best I've ever seen.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts covering it all from Singapore. So I mentioned you're 12 hours ahead of us here in New York, and already we have seen people arriving like even Dennis Rodman a short time ago.
Yeah, you know, everybody's here and everybody wants to be a part of the action. And why not? I mean, when the president sits down with Kim Jong-un a little less than 8 hours from now, Harris, it will be history in the making. As you pointed out, no U.S. president has ever sat down with a leader with North Korea. And when you look at where they were just a number of months ago compared to where they are now, things have been moving ahead literally at light speed. The president, when he sits down with Kim Jong-un in that one-on-one meeting and in the expanded bilat tomorrow morning, beginning at 9 o'clock Singapore time, 9 p.m. there in New York City, the president is prepared to offer him a lot. Economic guarantees. And you see the president there with Lee Hsien Loong, who is the Prime Minister of Singapore. The president was meeting with him earlier today. But the president willing to give Kim Jong-un economic guarantees, security guarantees, perhaps an end to the Korean War, and the potential for normalization of relations with the United States, which would also open up expansive trade with the United States. But the president and his team are going to make it clear they have all that to offer, but it will only come if Kim Jong-un gives up his nuclear weapons program. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, in a press briefing late yesterday, made that perfectly clear. Listen here.
The ultimate objective we seek from diplomacy with North Korea has not changed. The complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korea Peninsula is the only outcome that the United States will accept. Sanctions will remain until North Korea completely and verifiably eliminates its weapons of mass destruction programs. If diplomacy does not move in the right direction, and we are hopeful that it will continue to do so, those measures will increase.
Now, we see a lot of good cop, bad cop being played here, Harris, and even the president with himself playing good cop and bad cop, and the Secretary of State as well. The president using very diplomatic language toward Kim Jong-un, but at the same time saying this is a one-shot deal. This is his only opportunity, which is an indication that if things don't go well here and Kim resumes his nuclear program, a pursuit of intercontinental ballistic missiles tipped with nuclear warheads, things are not going to work out well for him. The president playing down expectations for what's possible. The reason is he's hoping that there will be a surprise. And let's show you some more of those pictures of Kim Jong-un, perhaps in getting a little bit of a taste of what might lie ahead with security guarantees and economic guarantees from the United States. Kim Jong-un was out and about in Singapore tonight with the foreign minister of Singapore. One of the places he went was to the top of the Marina Bay Sands Hotel. That's the foreign minister on the left there. It has an enormous ship-shaped pool bar observation deck at the top with breathtaking views of Singapore. You can't see any of the views there, but trust me, it's unbelievable. And Kim may be getting a glimpse at the economic miracle of Singapore and wondering, could Pyongyang perhaps get some of this?
Yeah, you know,
but again, he's got to be willing to give up those nuclear weapons, and there's been no indications thus far that any member of the Kim family has been willing to do that.
well, we do know Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that they were moving toward a more defined agreement about what denuclearization would look like. So that is kind of where you have to start. And I caught the nuance too, John.
But he was very clear to say he was very clear to say, though, Harris, that he's not going to describe what that is.
Right, exactly. But I caught the nuance in your reporting too, because that one-shot deal is a little different than the 300 additional sanctions that he's going to lay if this doesn't go well. So it's interesting how the story is moving forward and how things are kind of getting layered in. And now we're just a few hours away. John Roberts, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thanks, Harris.
All right, so it helps to talk with someone who has been to the region in the last few months and met with some of the key players involved in the talks. I want to bring in Congressman Ted Yoho, sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and chairs the subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific, a Florida Republican we often go to for times like this. You and I have been talking regularly over the last few weeks. So I want to bring you on to just handicap, if you will, the next few hours. What happens? We know that the two leaders will meet for 2 hours with an interpreter. That seems like a long time.
It does, Harris, and it's like you started off this segment talking about the historic moment that we're entering in right now. This is, I mean, I can't overemphasize how monumental this is. First time a U.S. president with a North Korean leader to sit down to negotiate hopefully a denuclearization and a peace treaty and peace on the Korean Peninsula. This is huge, and this, if we can do this in the 21st century, we can figure out how to do other conflicts that may arise in the future peacefully. And this, I can't tell you, overemphasize how huge this is.
The rhetoric going in, and including some of the optics, Congressman, of Kim Jong-un hanging out at a nightclub in Singapore. I'm guessing that doesn't often happen because it's making worldwide news.
Probably not.
But the optics and the talk going in, what is significant? What are you watching for? What are you hearing? What's catching your attention?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just that it's happening. You know, you look at where we were a year ago and then 6 months ago and then just a couple of weeks ago, that it's happening, and it's an icebreaker. President Trump, I think, is doing a great job the way he's negotiated this so far, a strong stance. He's negotiating from a stance of strength and not from one of weakness, not one of strategic patience. And moving forward, there'll be the talks about denuclearization. And of course, ultimately, you got to find out what they want and what we're willing to give. And Kim Jong-un has in his hands to change the course of North Korea, certainly for the better and for the Korean Peninsula. And he could make a historical move here that would last well beyond his years. It would be written about in the history books. And I know he's got to be thinking about that. And so I hope that guides his decisions.
Yeah, you know, last week I was just mentioning this to John Roberts. The president said, look, we can do a deal, and both sides, both South Korea, not sides, but countries who sit next to each other, obviously on that peninsula, South and North, can have economic prosperity. Or we can go the other way and slap 300 more sanctions on them. And then now, in just a little while, this is a one-shot deal. Now, the president had said he'd be willing to kind of look down the road that there might be more than one meeting. What does he mean, do you think, when he says one-shot deal?
Well, I think anytime, especially somebody like President Trump, when you're in negotiations, you got to be willing to walk away. If you're not willing to walk away, you wind up giving up too much. And I admire him for doing that. We've done real estates in the same way, you know, in our personal lives. You got to be willing to walk away. And if the other side knows that, they pay attention a little bit stronger.
Yeah, we know plenty of people who maybe overpaid for some of the things that they've negotiated for, like houses. Democrat Senator Markey says he wants Congress to have a say in any agreement. Let's watch that, and then I want to get your response.
Sure.
Part of this negotiation will also be an ending of the Korean War, which is something that goes all the way back to 1953. So I think it would be wise for the president to come to Congress to ensure that there is a ratification of any agreement.
Congressman, can the politics on Capitol Hill be put aside to ratify an agreement?
I absolutely think it can, you know, and it's like he brought up, you know, all we have is an armistice that was negotiated in 1953, so there's not a finality to it. And I think he's right. It needs to come through Congress, unlike the JCPOA with Iran. It was an agreement that never went through Congress. The Senate will be able to weigh in on it being a treaty. The House can support it, but the Senate will vote on it. And this makes it longer lasting, and this will give more assurance to the Kim regime that, you know, this is something that's not going to change when the next administration comes in. And if it's negotiated properly, it'll be a win-win situation for Kim Jong-un, but for the United States also and the rest of the world.
Real quickly,
this is historic. Yeah.
Before I let you go, real short answer. Does this over-legitimize, if you will, Kim Jong-un? Because that's been some of the criticism. You're going to legitimize a guy who's a dictator.
No, I don't think it does. I don't think it over-legitimizes it, but it just brings them into the forefront that we're serious about this, and we look forward to moving in a favorable direction.
All right. Congressman Yoho from the great state of Florida. Boy, we are perched to watch history now, aren't we? Thank you.
We sure are. Thank you.
Let's bring in the other side of the political aisle. Democratic Congressman John Garamendi of Florida, a member of the Armed Services Committee, and like Congressman Yoho, was recently in the region in South Korea in the past year. You and I, again, and I wanted to bring you both back, gentlemen, because we've gone and talked about maybe that juicy middle that we could get to. You just heard Congressman Yoho saying if there is a need to ratify an agreement to end the Korean War, not just have a temporary peace, which has felt like long temporary, but it's temporary nonetheless, that you think Democrats would be on board. You and I have talked about how we could maybe see a bipartisan solution. Talk with me more about that.
I think it's absolutely possible. Keep in mind, however, that this is very, very much about two Korean countries, North Korea and South Korea. This entire opportunity for the current meeting in Singapore really came about because the South Korean president reached out at the same time that the American government was putting on very, very heavy sanctions. And so if the South Koreans are on board together with the North Koreans on a peace treaty, then the United States will be very, very much a part of that. And would it result in some sort of treaty? Possibly. I don't know that that would be required in the process. Also, the United Nations is actually the reason why the United States was there in the first place. And the United Nations command continues on the Korean Peninsula, and the United States leads that multinational command. So it is complex, but it is a very real possibility going forward. Would Congress be on board? Probably so.
All right, Senator Markey, we played just a few moments ago from your side of the aisle saying that it should go through Congress if there's anything to ratify like a treaty. We'll see what happens on that point. But, you know, from your political standpoint, and we've been waiting for something like this to happen through the 25 years of sanctions and diplomacy that really didn't work. As you look at this and we get ready to write new pages in history, just what is your point of view on all of this? What do you see?
Well, there's certainly a long, long history here. Part of the history is on the North Korean side, where they have been trying over these many decades to secure their regime, to make certain that that regime could not be overturned either internally, and that's why it is such a terrible place with all kinds of deaths and camps and the like, and also to protect their regime from outside invasion, particularly South Korea. And so the North Koreans have built a very substantial conventional army. At the same time, they have pursued the nuclear bomb. In the 1990s, actually, Jimmy Carter, not then president, went to North Korea and did negotiate a proposal that was agreed to by President Clinton that would have terminated or stopped the North Korean development of a nuclear weapon in exchange for oil as well as for
He's talked about that in recent days.
Yeah, and that didn't happen for reasons. Actually, the United States government did not fund the program, and at the same time, it's almost certain that North Korea was not carrying out its side of the agreement and was continuing to develop a bomb.
Do you feel
all of that tells us?
do you feel like we get another bite at the apple? I mean, well, I'm hearing you say
Yes.
security, and that's one of the things that President Trump has promised Kim Jong-un. I want to give you a last word.
Well, certainly it is the security that North Korea is searching for. Their bomb and their missiles give them the upper hand in the negotiations. And now they see that as their security blanket. And indeed it is. So will they give it up in exchange for what? Economic? The end of sanctions, as well as some sort of security blanket to replace it.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Coming into the current century. That's also on the table as we see Kim Jong-un hanging out at kind of soaking up the nightlife tonight, 12 hours ahead of us here in New York, in Singapore. Congressman Garamendi of California, I hear optimism, and I often hear it from you.
Yes.
And so we will check back after the summit and see where we are. Thank you for being on the program.
I'll be there. Thank you.
Senator Lindsey Graham has some advice for President Trump ahead of tonight's summit. Watch this.
The best way to get peace, not war, is to convince North Korea that they're going to be in a war and they will lose it if they don't pursue peace.
I will talk with a retired brigadier general about whether Graham is right about that, war or peace, and growing speculation that former FBI Director James Comey could face criminal charges for his handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation once the DOJ Inspector General's report is released. Could that be the case? Alan Dershowitz is here to weigh in. Don't you move. To see if President Trump can make a deal with North Korea during tonight's historic summit in Singapore. GOP Senator Lindsey Graham says the president's maximum pressure campaign got Kim Jong-un to the table. Now he warns the military option must remain on the table for diplomatic negotiations to be successful.
Best way to get peace, not war, is to convince North Korea that they're going to be in a war and they will lose it if they don't pursue peace. Everything else before has failed. Nobody in North Korea believed that the past presidents would use military force. If they don't believe Donald Trump will use military force as the last resort, the people in North Korea are making a very big mistake, because he will if he has to. He doesn't want to.
There is now a retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Anthony Tata on deck. He is also a best-selling author, including the book Direct Fire. Great to see you, General. Thank you for being here.
Great to see you, Harris.
So the options are war or peace. That's pretty much usually the case anyway if we talk military, right? Does North Korea fear us?
That's right. And let's remember how we got here, Harris. You know, we've had about 3 different administrations trying to deal with the problem. They didn't know how to deal with it, and they didn't effectively deal with it. And what the Trump administration has done is very effectively leverage and synchronize the elements of national power: diplomatic, information, military, and economic. And what Senator Graham is talking about is that military element of national power. Our mighty military, our brave men and women that go overseas and do our bidding for us, they are poised and ready to go. And over the last year, 18 months, we've beefed up our capability. We've had 3 carrier strike groups in the Sea of Japan. We've put more aircraft on Guam. And so Kim Jong-un knows what's going on. And you heard the president say about a week ago, emphasize in his comment when he canceled the summit and then it was back on, he talked about the $700 billion budget for this year, this coming year. You know, that's a huge astronomical number for any country, but for North Korea, it's just, you know, not even fathomable for them. So the teeth to all of this diplomacy and economic sanctions and information warfare, the tweets back and forth, et cetera, is the military. And that's what Senator Graham is talking about.
Do they fear us, North Korea?
No, you know what, I think everybody should be concerned about North Korea's ability to strap a nuke on one of their intercontinental ballistic missiles. And so I think this meeting that is happening in Singapore has ramifications for world peace, and it's a tremendous opportunity here. And I don't agree with your previous guest that you know, Kim Jong-un has the upper hand. You know, President Trump has the upper hand in these negotiations, because either Kim Jong-un makes a deal or we go to war, as Senator Graham said, because President Trump's been telegraphing this for a year. He talked about springtime of this year, a year ago, that something needed to give.
Yeah, that is true.
It is not a coincidence that we're in discussions right now. And think of the great opportunity for Kim Jong-un in North Korea, where he can, it's the same people as the South Koreans. I've been over there several times, and the families are divided still by this armistice. And so we're talking reunification. We're talking a peace treaty that will last and help reunify this peninsula. We're talking about denuclearization. We're talking about economic regrowth.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that reunification, General Tata, because the president has said he wants to see both North and South Korea economically flourishing. Whether they would get together in the short term, that might happen long term. But his idea, at least the way he's laid it out, is if you make them both whole, it is amazing what can happen from that. Before I let you go, though, you said you disagreed with my previous guest, and that was Congressman Garamendi, a Democrat from California, who was making the notion that we can only have it one way or the other. But I hear you saying war or peace. Is there no room for those 300 sanctions that the president says he's going to roll into if he walks away? I mean, it's going to get financially even more painful if he walks away from the table. Last word.
Well, you know, Harris, this is all about synchronizing the elements of power. And at some time, the military option needs to kick in if the others are ineffective. And this is what the other administrations did not do. And so sanctions can work to bring people to the negotiating table. But at the end of the day, we need to have a non-nuclear North Korea. And so that is the goal here. And ultimately, we want unification. Ultimately, we want an economically prosperous North Korea that employs its workers and doesn't imprison them and so forth.
Yeah.
And that is all achievable. And particularly if you think, Harris, about Kim Jong-un is rumored to have been schooled in the West. He's been exposed to the West. And so perhaps he's kind of crafty because he came in with two visions. One is to be a nuclear power. One is to be an economic power, whereas his father and grandfather just came in with one vision.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's the tradition of the Korean leader to have a vision. And so the grandfather was to be a self-reliant nation. The father was, Kim Jong-il, was to have a powerful military. Kim Jong-un had nuclear power, economic power, and perhaps he's kind of cagey and he's going to trade one off for the other.
It's interesting, too, because he's replaced three of his top people, too. They're younger. They're said to have his back a little bit more, but they also have probably that duality of mission that you're describing.
That's right.
General Tata, I wrote it down. It's about synchronizing elements of power, diplomacy, and then you've got that military option. Appreciate your expertise. We'll bring you back. Thank you.
Thank you, Harris.
Well, the White House is now firing back after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau went after President Trump's tariffs at the end of the G7 summit, just days before the president's high-stakes sit-down with the North Korean leader. So what is the impact of that? And did Justin Trudeau betray the president at a critical time? Because they had a communique, and then he kind of walked it back with some side-eye. A former State Department official to talk about it. Stay close.
We leave, and Trudeau pulls this sophomoric political stunt for domestic consumption. He really kind of stabbed us in the back.
Broke out after the G7 summit appears to be escalating now. President Trump is once again hitting back at Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau after Trudeau held a news conference at the end of the summit going after the president's tariffs. President Trump tweeted this: fair trade is now to be called fool trade if it is not reciprocal. According to a Canada release, they make almost $100 billion in trade with U.S. Guess they were bragging and got caught. Minimum is $17 billion. Tax dairy from U.S. at 270%. Then Justin acts hurt when called out. The president's advisors also went after the timing of Justin Trudeau's criticism. Watch it.
President is going to negotiate with Kim of North Korea in Singapore. It is a historic negotiation, and there's no way this president is not going to stand strong. He's not going to allow other people to suddenly take pot shots at him hours before that summit.
News is being made. Let's go to Garrett Tenney live in Washington with the latest. Garrett.
Well, Harris, the White House was clearly not happy with how the G summit wrapped up. And despite that strong rhetoric from the White House, our allies are not backing down in their criticism of President Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum. Today, British Prime Minister Theresa May told Parliament that improving international trade cannot be done by taking action against allies. And, quote, the loss of trade through tariffs undermines competition, reduces productivity, removes the incentive to innovate, and ultimately makes everyone poorer. And in response, the EU will impose countermeasures. But we need to avoid a continued tit-for-tat escalation. All seemed well at the G7 summit when President Trump departed on Saturday, but those good feelings quickly evaporated following a news conference by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in which he announced plans for reciprocal tariffs on U.S. goods in response to those tariffs on aluminum and steel as well.
I have made it very clear to the President that it is not something we relish doing, but it is something that we absolutely will do, because Canadians, we're polite, we're reasonable, but we also will not be pushed around.
Now, that is nothing new that Trudeau has not said before, but what the White House took exception with was the timing of the remarks, which could potentially make the president look weak and estranged from allies as he heads into his sit-down with Kim Jong-un. So the president dispatched aides to the Sunday shows to punch back and dismiss any notions of weakness.
There's a special place in hell for any foreign leader that engages in bad faith diplomacy with President Donald J. Trump and then tries to stab him in the back on the way out the door. And that's what bad faith Justin Trudeau did with that stunt press conference.
Those remarks are not sitting well with our European allies who have responded with a united front. French President Emmanuel Macron said international cooperation cannot be dictated by fits of anger. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said Trump's refusal to sign a group statement at the G7 was sobering and a bit depressing. Now, Democrats back at home, they are piling on the president as well.
This wasn't just with Trudeau. This is with our best allies. 7 best allies. And it seems to me not to sign a statement of solidarity, which stands for everything that we stand for, is a big mistake. I understand the president was upset. The president could have said that, but to walk away from our allies in this way, I think is a mistake.
Now, President Trump is not one to back down either, and this morning he made that clear in a string of tweets bashing the tariffs of other countries and concluding with this: sorry, we cannot let our friends or enemies take advantage of us on trade anymore. We must put the American worker first. So, Harris, this rising trade war clearly not wrapping up down anytime soon.
Garrett, thank you very much. Let's bring in Kristen Whiten, a former State Department official under Presidents Trump and George W. Bush. I love talking to you about this stuff because you call it what it is, and you're calling this one game playing. Why is Canada's Prime Minister doing it this way?
Well, I think he wants to lead some international coalition of progressives, basically join the resistance to Trump. And incidentally, it's not quite as one-sided as we've been led to believe. Italy is a member of the G7. The Italian prime minister, new on the job, actually sided with Donald Trump that Russia should be back in, bringing it back to the G8. Prime Minister Abe, you know, we do have some trade disagreements with Japan, but he didn't join this glee club of opposition to the United States. So, yes, old Europe, Germany, France, they're not upset, or they are upset that we are trying to equalize some of the unfair tariffs that they have gotten away with on us. But, you know, we are getting there with a lot of countries revising trade agreements. We already have the South Korea free trade agreement revised to our advantage, a deal with Australia, a deal with Brazil. So, you know, I think it's basically some progressive upset we're seeing.
And I had to laugh. I wrote it down, the glee club of opposition, those people resisting the president. But it's a bigger picture than what this president has put into play, or this back and forth with Trudeau and our president, because Canada does not have the leverage in this. I mean, when you look at the numbers of 20% of their GDP, they depend on us. I mean, this is not an even playing field for them or for us. Talk to me about who has the leverage.
That's right. Absolutely, we do. And we're not being unfair with it. We're not being brutish with it, but just the numbers speak for themselves. We have about $330 billion of trade going each way with Canada. That's, as you point out, 20% of Canada's GDP, only about 1% of our GDP. So if there is a trade war, and I don't really think there's going to be one, it's one where we would absolutely cream our Canadian friends. More importantly, the only thing that Justin Trudeau did, he sort of accomplished two things at the summit. He undermined the G7, possibly permanently, but he put Canadian auto workers at serious risk because it looks like the administration was sort of under Section 232, which is a provision that allows us to defend strategically important industries, was going to examine higher tariffs on autos and auto parts, and that will probably be accelerated. Canada, if you add autos and auto parts, exports about $64 billion worth to the United States. That's about 3 or 4% of their economy that they're putting at risk just so Justin Trudeau can be anti-Trump.
Well, and the flip side is they're taxing our dairy up to 200% in tariffs. So, I mean, there's a reason for everybody to sit down, but as you called it, a glee club of opposition. We'll see if it happens. And then the big question of how this impacts the North Korean negotiation. We'll have to see, because that's coming up in just a few hours. Christian Whiten, thank you.
Thank you, Harris.
Growing speculation that former FBI Director James Comey could find himself in legal trouble following the release of that DOJ Inspector General's report on the Bureau's handling of the Hillary Clinton email case. Could we see criminal charges? Alan, speculation that former FBI Director James Comey could find himself in hot water legally following the release of DOJ Inspector General Michael Horowitz's report on the FBI's handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. The document is set to be released on Thursday of this week. Reportedly uses the word insubordinate to describe James Comey's behavior during his time at the FBI. Here's President Trump's attorney Rudy Giuliani just yesterday.
First thing we're going to get is a report from Inspector General Horowitz on Comey's handling of Hillary, which I think is going to be very, very critical, as it should be. Comey really has a chance of being prosecuted as a result of it, but we'll see.
Comey has previously defended his handling of the email probe by saying he made the best decisions possible given the situation. Let's bring in Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law Professor Emeritus and author of the book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump. Always great to see you. So talk to me about Rudy Giuliani and James Comey. Is he right about what he's saying in terms of he could find himself in legal trouble?
Well, Rudy's a good friend of mine and a great lawyer, but I fundamentally disagree with trying to criminalize political differences in this context. Look, I've been a longtime opponent of trying to criminalize political differences by Donald Trump and by people in the Trump administration. And now that the shoe's on the other foot, I take the same position. Let's not turn disagreements into crimes. Even if he acted insubordinately, that's not a crime. And we have to start disarming both sides and stop weaponizing the criminal justice system and using it against political opponents. So I hope that if he's criticized, that's fine in the marketplace of ideas. But let's not turn criticism into criminalization on either side.
All right, so that's Rudy Giuliani's take on it. But let's take a look and hear from Bob Goodlatte on the same topic, because what he's saying is if it does progress to the point where Comey or anybody else coming out of the Inspector General's report needs further litigation or prosecution, here's what he sees.
I think, and many others in the Congress continue to think, that we need to have an independent special counsel, separate and apart from the work that Mr. Mueller is doing, to handle these potential criminal referrals and to look into this matter for the possibility of finding further matters beyond what the Inspector General does.
So, Alan, what I hear the Congressman Goodlatte saying there is, you know, let's have somebody who can take a look at this so that you can see whether or not it's simply politics.
Well, that's what the Inspector General is doing. But, you know, I don't think two wrongs make a right. I think it was wrong to appoint a special counsel to investigate Trump. I think it's equally wrong to appoint a special counsel to investigate Comey. You know, everybody thinks that special counsel...
Even though we know he's leaked information, we know some of the things that James Comey has done. And by the way, politically, he's not making either side of the political aisle happy.
There's no question about that, but you don't turn political opposition into criminalization. Leaking is not a crime unless it's leaking of a grand jury material. Let's understand that there are criminal statutes, and they should be defined narrowly, and we shouldn't be weaponizing the criminal justice system against either side. I was critical of President Trump when he called for lock her up to Hillary Clinton, or let's have a special counsel for Hillary Clinton. The president has said that he thinks special counsel are unconstitutional. I don't agree with that. But if he thinks they're unconstitutional as to him, they are surely unconstitutional as well as to Comey or as to anybody else. We have to have neutral principles, the same principles.
All right.
People confuse my advocacy. I'm not there as an advocate for President Trump. I'm an advocate for civil liberties because the American Civil Liberties Union is dead in the water.
Alan, because I'm going to lose you, and I want to step in with what we know to be true about allegations of bias inside the FBI. We had text messages flowing between at least two employees that we know about who were having an affair, who would like to press against this president. And was there bias inside the FBI? I mean, the Inspector General is looking at a whole lot here.
And he should be, and those are appropriate functions for the Inspector General. To me, having an honest Inspector General, and we have one, obviates the need for special counsel. He should be looking into this, and he will make a report.
And if there's signs of bias that come out of this, we know that he can't prosecute. So if there's signs of bias,
but he could recommend prosecution, but he has to show that there's an actual crime committed, and that crime would be prosecuted whether it was done by a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. We have to have one standard of justice for all, and we have to use the criminal law only as a last resort when there's clear evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that an existing statutory crime has been committed. I don't think that standard has been met for anybody so far involved in this whole disaster.
All right. Well, we will all be waiting for that IG report to come out to tell us exactly ahead of a Senate hearing as well. So we're going to learn a whole lot later this week. Alan Dershowitz, thank you for being on the program. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
We are all just hours away from witnessing history together. President Trump's sit down with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. Why the White House is sounding more optimistic and what a successful summit would mean for the president's legacy. The Power Panel next.
Everyone, I'm Dana Perino, and the Singapore summit is about to happen. Our own Brett Baer and John Roberts kick off our coverage of President Trump's historic meeting with Kim Jong-un. Plus, one of our guests says there are 7 possible scenarios for the outcome of this summit, and we'll tick through those. And it's Midterm Monday. We'll ask Chris Starwalt what we need to know ahead of tomorrow's primaries. He's here in New York City on the Daily.
Trump's historic meeting with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And while the president's team is sounding more optimistic by the hour, some are urging caution when it comes to the likelihood of the North dumping its nukes. The Associated Press's Eric Talmadge is the only Western reporter with a regular posting in North Korea.
I think if there is going to be denuclearization, it's going to be a very long and difficult process, and we haven't really gotten any indication from Pyongyang that anything serious is going to happen along those lines in the immediate future.
But counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway, says she believes that North Korea could change its ways.
The fact is that Chairman Kim and his people have an incentive, and it's if you give up your nuclear program, perhaps you could be a more peaceful, more prosperous, and not be seen as a pariah around the world.
Time for the Power Panel. David Tafuri served as foreign policy advisor to the Obama campaign and as a former State Department official. Rebecca Heinrichs is national security analyst and senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Rebecca, I'm going to start with you. We're getting closer. The rhetoric has shifted a little bit. The president's saying you got one shot.
Yeah, you know, I think it's a mistake to speculate too much about what we think may or may not happen. I've been skeptical, you know this, and we've talked about this so much. I've been skeptical about the North Koreans' desire to make the strategic decision to get rid of their nuclear weapons. But there are things that continue to pop up. You know, one thing I've been watching for is a change in the tone from North Korean propaganda in the way it talks about President Trump in the U.S. And there's reports today that there's been a shift. And so that's the kind of thing that you want to see. And President Trump and everybody in his administration has not lowered the standard about what we want. Complete and verifiable dismantlement, an irreversible dismantlement of their program. Because that hasn't budged and North Korea is still willing to talk, I say that the ball is still in play.
That's interesting. How much leverage does the United States have with its military? David, I had on General Tata earlier, Brigadier General with the Army, retired now, who said, you know what, we have a lot because they know we will use it, but they have something too.
Sure, we have a lot of leverage. We're the most powerful military in the world, and for all the threats we get from the leader of North Korea, he's nervous about what the U.S. might do with our military. But of course, they have amassed a huge amount of conventional weapons on the border with South Korea. They have artillery pointed at South Korea. So, just exclusive of their nuclear weapons, they can also use conventional weapons to attack our ally, South Korea. So that's why the stakes are so high for this summit. I agree with Rebecca that it's unlikely that we're going to get to a full deal. Secretary of State Pompeo says he will only accept full denuclearization. I don't think that's going to come out of this summit, but I think it's important to be optimistic about this summit. This summit is a start of a dialogue, and what I think we can realistically hope for is some good talk, some parameters being set between President Trump and the leader of North Korea, so that there can be future dialogue towards a actual peace agreement. But the peace agreement and denuclearization are going to be very complicated.
All right, Rebecca, I am going to give you the last word, but I have to press in here. You're talking about this, David, is very different than it was last Friday when we were kind of peeped into the White House when the North Korean letter carrier was meeting with the president. I mean, I hear you much more optimistic, and sometimes it's like an election, I suppose. Things change when you get closer to the date. Rebecca, last word.
I was optimistic then. I just said we shouldn't glorify the fact that someone who was the leader of North Korea's intelligence agency was in the Oval Office. This is a person who's committed crimes.
We got it. I want to give Rebecca last word. Go ahead.
I mean, look, we've got a very unconventional president who's very goal-oriented, and so he's going to be doing some things that make some of us uncomfortable, especially in terms of his diplomatic rhetoric and overtures he makes towards Kim. But as long as President Trump continues to say we've got a threat of military force, we've got 300 sanctions loaded up and ready to go back on, if this doesn't go, you've got some heat on Kim, and he's got to make a choice. And so, I'm relatively optimistic that we're going to have something good come out of this.
Thank you both. We'll be right back.